Okay, so let us move on. So there is question number 4. In fact, see, ये जो टॉपिक है हमारा वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट मेजरमेंट एंड प्रॉब्लम्स, तो अगर मैं इस टॉपिक की बात करूं, number of areas if we prepare from this topic or of this topic subtopics, high probability that any question will be not out of what we have studied. So one we have already done, concept of economic growth and economic development. Similarly, if you talk about related with this is the related developmental measures. Also, their shortcomings. In fact, if you look into there is one topic which I have taken up here, Human Development Index. If you have seen the syllabus, Human Development Index is in which topic? कौन से टॉपिक में है ये? It is in perspectives in human geography. It is not in economic geography. It is in perspectives in human geography. But you can understand that this topic is a related topic to what we are studying. So I have taken up this topic here only. ठीक है? So if you have looked into the previous year papers, you might have seen several times they have asked about the HDI and its shortcomings. Critical analysis of Human Development Index. ठीक है? Similarly, if you talk about other things and other very important question can be related with the theoretical underpinnings of concept of development and underdevelopment. So this is another area where you can expect that there can be questions which can be asked. Besides, other type of questions can be asked, like for example, questions on inequality can be asked. I can put it in other ways also, like for example, this I can say geography of development and underdevelopment. ठीक है? So geographies of underdevelopment or development means what? How spatially variable is the process. ठीक है? इसी में specifically they can particularly ask about developing countries. ठीक है? So at least if we have prepared all these heads, subheads, we can be sure कि इस टॉपिक में से एक भी क्वेश्चन हमारे रेंज के बाहर नहीं. ठीक है? I have taken up this and partly this. Also here HDI I have taken up. This I have taken up. Whatever topics, if they are left and I feel like they are important for this year exam, I will be covering it through the tests. ठीक है? So more or less we will cover majority of the things. ठीक है? Okay. So moving on to our next question, question number 4. And this question says, it is a statement, there is not a single landlocked country that can claim a high average income. And of the top economies ranked by economic output per capita, only 3 are tropical: Hong Kong, Singapore and Mauritius. Write a critique. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes. Frame your answer. Okay, so while answering this question, what is required? We have to be aware about the theme because this is a statement based question. So it is a kind of tricky question. जो अभी मैंने I showed you that there are tricky questions as well. So in such questions, you have to identify the theme from where the question has been asked, and accordingly you will answer. So can we say that this question it is actually related with this theme? What are the causes of the process of development? And there are multiple views on how development or underdevelopment is caused. Okay, so if I just point out the causes, just a list down these causes or viewpoints, there are several viewpoints. One category of viewpoints, first category of viewpoints are related with the viewpoints related with environmental determinism. Okay, so this is one category of viewpoints. It talks about that a country essentially becomes developed only when it has, for example, availability of resources, or it can be related, sometimes they degrade into, if you talk about racial superiority theories. So such kind of viewpoint is basically what it is, environmental deterministic viewpoint. But this environmental deterministic viewpoint was objected later on by the economic determinists. So what they are talking about, there is like the classical economic views. And one of the examples of the classical economic view, you must have studied about the Rostow model of economic growth. Okay, which talks about what? Can we say, according to Rostow model, it is related with the stage of growth, economic growth, that would determine how much of the economic development would be found. Okay, other classical economic views are there, like Samuelson's interlocking theory, which talks about that there are certain factors, and if there all those factors are found, then only what will happen, there will be the process of development. Okay, so these are there. Then there are others, like for example, one is the variation of the classical economics, spatial economic. Spatial economic theories. And spatial economic theories क्या कहती हैं? Spatial economic theories, number of them are there. Like for example, you might be knowing about Medall's cumulative causation theory. Similarly, if you talk about the core periphery theory, of फ्रीडमैन, एक हमारे सिलेबस में डायरेक्टली मेंशन है, कौन सा है? ग्रोथ पोल थ्योरी. The growth pole theory of economic development. So again, these are the spatial economic views. Then there are neoclassical views. So one of the neoclassical views is the export base model of economic development. ठीक है, so that is one of the neoclassical theory which is there, and essentially what happens, if there is export base, then there will be multiplier theory or multiplier effect will be there, and it would boost further the economic development. Then there are other views like the radical or the political economy. पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी व्यूज. ठीक है, सो अब देखो, अगर मैं इस स्टेटमेंट को पढ़ता हूं, इफ आई स्टडी दिस स्टेटमेंट, कैन आई से दैट दिस स्टेटमेंट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस फिनोमेना being the primary reason for economic development? Yes or no? It is saying there is not a single landlocked country that can claim a high average income. That means environmental determinism, the location becomes the key factor, resource availability, If you are landlocked, can I say you don't have the marine mobility, which is a resource? Okay. Same thing, and of the top economies ranked by economic output per capita, only 3 are tropical: Hong Kong, Singapore, and Mauritius. Write a critique is the statement. So this is basically what it is treating the only cause, the major cause of development being this. Okay. Can we say it is a simplistic view? Yes or no? Is it oversimplifying the process of development or economic development? Obviously, yes. Can we say development or economic development is dependent upon multitudes of factors and not just these deterministic or environmental deterministic factors like resource availability? Here, this theory, this statement is mostly that it is saying that there is resource, if resources are available, then only there will be higher economic development. And if there is some lack of resources, particular type of resources, then there will be lack of economic development. This is what it is saying. But can we say that it is more, if you talk about complex than this? The phenomena is much more complex than this. Can we take landlocked ka ek example? Can we take Switzerland as an example country of being landlocked and still very developed? Yes or no? Okay. Same thing we can talk about the tropical. Itself the statement is talking about 3 tropical countries. Can we add few more like Middle East countries? They are also tropical. Today, do we find that if you take the countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they are diversifying their economy? Okay. They have developed, for example, tourism. They have developed hospitality sector, other hotels, etc. They have developed aircraft industry, highly developed. Okay. So definitely we can say that it is not just result of the environmentally available resources at our disposal. In the present world, when the mobility has become high and technology has become even higher, can we essentially say that the development can be achieved in multiple ways? And from there, I will start criticizing. ठीक है? So first part में हमने ये statement को बता दिया कि what it is saying. So essentially, what is the crux of this idea? The crux of this idea is that, or this statement is that, for any development or higher economic development to take place, there should be availability of certain resources. Okay? Here one resource we are talking about is the location being a resource in itself, or here we are talking about the shelter and climate as a resource. Okay? But as we said with example, we can say it is not necessarily so. There can be several other multitude of factors which are also responsible for the process of economic development. It is a complex phenomenon. Okay? And from there, I will start about one important factor is the stage of development reached. I will mention Rostow. So what Rostow says, that the variable development process that is seen, pattern of development which is seen in the world, it is related to the stage of development reached by the countries, which in turn is outcome of when these countries started their economic reform process. Okay? So if these countries started their economic reform process earlier, that means they will be more ahead in the process or the stages of economic growth. And essentially this means that there will be more development. For example, इसका एक example लेते हैं रोस्टो का. Can we say that certain countries, like if you talk about India, like China, Brazil, several such countries, they began their process of development since 1950s itself? Yes or no? ठीक है, they adopted democracy, and India, for example, it adopted a mixed model of development. ठीक है, and 1990s we further liberalized. What has happened as a result of which can we say India right now is in the stage of drive towards maturity? ठीक है, same with the case of China. If we compare with this with other countries like countries of Africa, Mali, Chad, etc., they couldn't achieve the required political stability. And as a result of which, what happened? They were unable to begin their economic reforms process. And what is the outcome? These countries are still located where? They are located in either they are taking off or they are in the preconditions to take off. And that explains why they are less developed. So this is the idea which was there of Rostow. So one criticism ho gaya. Similarly, Samuelson's interlocking theory, what it says, that there should be at least 4 factors which are interlocking, which should be simultaneously present for any economic development process to become successful. Okay, so what are these 4 factors? One is the availability of natural resources. Second, if you talk about, there should be enough population size. Okay. Third, there should be development of technology, and fourth, there should be efficient mode of production. And according to Samuelson, which is the most efficient mode of production? It is the market based model. So when there is interlocking of these factors, then what we find that there will be fast economic growth or economic development achieved. Okay, so that is there. And not only this, there are other factors as well. Like for example, मैं growth pole theory को ले लेता हूँ. Growth pole theory says that it is not so much simple. It is related with many economic processes which are operating. So what it says, that if in an economy at a place there is presence of propulsive firms belonging to leading industry, so there is presence of propulsive firms belonging to the leading industry. What these firms will do? They will induce fast or propulsive growth in that particular region. Okay? And this growth will essentially then do what? This growth will lead to the polarization impact. Okay? So what this industry will do? It will create propulsive growth, which in turn will lead to polarization and agglomeration. Okay? And this in turn will do what? It would create growth poles. Okay? And from where later there will be, in later stage, what can happen? There can be spread effects. So how strong are the spread effects? That would determine how will be the level of development and inequality. Okay? So that means अगर इंडिया ने landlocked regions like Jharkhand, if India created Bokaro iron and steel plant, it was done by the government, it was a PSU. So basically what we were doing, we were creating a propulsive firm belonging to the leading industry. We were trying to do that. Although the problem was that it couldn't achieve that type of propulsive growth. And because of that, the spread effects were very slow, and it became island of development. ठीक है. So that is what is the basic idea of growth pole. So इसमें से स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक में से एक उठा करके बोल दिया. Same thing, if I go towards the neoclassical view, it says that ultimately your export based model, it says that where you have comparative advantage in the global trade, in which commodity you will have comparative advantage in the global trade, that will determine your levels of development. Okay. So for example, if I talk about a trade equation, so there is A, B and C. A is essentially a raw material. There is a B is semi-finished goods, and here there is finished goods. So if the cost of this was 100, there was value addition done of 100, what will be the cost of this semi-finished, or price of this semi-finished goods will become? It would become 1000. Okay, you do more value addition of 500 here, and here it will become 10,000 and even more. That means if a country has comparative advantage in finished goods, can we say it will be more richer? It will be more developed? So many countries have advantage of technology, and because of that they are lying towards the right hand of this equation. So they will be what? They will be more developed. While there are other countries who don't have that kind of technology, so their comparative advantage lies in what? Either selling raw material or selling semi-finished goods. For example, देखेंगे बाद में, India has been trying very hard to promote its automobile industry. ठीक है? Why? Because we want to reach to that sea level. ठीक है? We have been exporter for long time of what? Iron and steel, which is a semi-finished good, or we have been exporting iron ore also, which is a raw material, but it has been disadvantageous to us. So that is why we want to graduate into the category of the developed countries. Okay? So this is basically what, this is the export based theory, and this money the funds which will come, as a result of which it will have a multiplier effect on rest of the economy. Okay? There will be forward and backward linkages which will lead to development of all of the economy. Can we say the similar kind of phenomena or similar type of model of development, has it been adopted by China? Other examples like Southeast Asian tigers. Okay? So they have adopted a similar model of development, and we have seen, or we can see that the results are very fine. They have developed compared to other Asian economies or other developing countries. They have grown faster. Okay? So again, it says it is not as simple as that. Similarly, the political economic factors or approach. So political economy view or the Marxist view says that development patterns are also determined by the political economy which is present, which is adopted. Okay? So according to it, development is essentially what? It is function of the politico-economic structure, politico-economic structure which is essentially adopted. So for example, बाद में देखेंगे इसको, it says that when there is capitalist economy, in capitalist economies what will be there? Inequality is inbuilt. Inequality is inbuilt in the capitalistic model of development. How it is inbuilt in the capitalistic model of development? It believes that for survival, capitalism requires inequality. Okay? So what it says, for survival, capitalism requires inequality. So it is involved in production of spaces. Production of spaces. So what happens? Suppose there is an area where the investment is concentrated. So what will happen to this area? Can we say because of the concentration of investment, will it see the process of development? Economic development will be taking place. But as you can understand, there is investment if you keep on doing. Can we say there is a time will come when you will experience marginal returns? ठीक है, एंड प्रॉफिट विल डिक्लाइन. ठीक है, तो इसका फंडा देखो क्या होता है कि एक्चुअली व्हाट हैपेंस, हाउ इट स्टार्ट्स, देयर इज सर्टेन फॉर्म which does certain kind of innovation, and there is initially what will happen in this area, it will enjoy a monopoly, and because of that it will earn its profits. But sooner or later, ultimately what will happen, others will also begin to offer the same. So this will give rise to what? This will give rise to competition. Ultimately what will be happening, because of this competition, the monopoly which was enjoyed earlier will no more be. So because of that there will be decline in profits. ठीक है, and as there is decline in profits, what will happen, these firms will shift to new areas which were underdeveloped. Can you imagine अगर सारा एरिया एक साथ डेवलप कर दे तो सब जगह पर सैचुरेशन आ जाएगा. ठीक है, so they want always certain areas which remain underdeveloped so that later when there is crisis they can shift and again continue to enjoy the profits, higher profits. So this is the Marxist view which says that it is inbuilt in certain systems that there will be inequality, and that explains why there is inequality or development underdevelopment phenomena in the world. Okay? So basically what we are trying to say here, we were criticizing that idea that the statement was treating development or underdevelopment process as what? As monodimensional phenomenon. ठीक है, development underdevelopment is a multi-dimensional phenomenon which depends upon variety of factors. ठीक है, so again, if I know the theme, any such tricky question will be very easy to cater. ठीक है, अगर हम नहीं कर पा रहे हैं इसका मतलब हमने अपने कंटेंट को सही से तैयार नहीं किया. We haven't prepared our content well. Okay, so moving on, question number 5. Even though HDI has brought about a paradigm shift in the way people think about development process, it has its own limitations. Examine. I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay. So even though HDI has brought about a paradigm shift in the way people think about development process, it has its own limitations. So अब इसमें what I have to do, I have to identify certain keywords around which my answer should be framed. So first part of the answer, it is talking about paradigm shift. ठीक है, how it has brought about a paradigm shift, how we are seeing the process of development through HDI. ठीक है, so एक पॉइंट तो ये हो गया हमारा, एक पार्ट ऑफ द मेन आंसर, मेन बॉडी, where I'll talk about how this paradigm shift has taken place. And second part is the limitations of HDI. ठीक है, तो एक तरह से appraisal and essentially you have to talk about the limitations. So it was a very simple question. बस ये बात बहुत क्लियर है कि many people will miss this keyword. ठीक है, and they will not be answering it from that perspective. So I can start with an introduction. क्या introduction दे सकते हैं? Can I talk about the here historical development of HDI? This can be a case. How in 1990s it was formalized. So that can be our introduction. Coming to main body. We can simply say it has definitely created a new paradigm of how development is understood and measured. How it is understood and measured. ठीक है, तो सबसे पहले यहाँ पर मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ, HDI को जो मेजर करने के लिए जो डायग्राम है, I think it was here somewhere I had put the diagram. Can I put it here? So what one very important thing, we have to show the paradigms. ठीक है, और जब पैराडाइम हमेशा वर्ड यूज होता है तो ऑलवेज रिमेंबर हाउ वी कैन शो दैट देयर इज अ पैराडाइम शिफ्ट को शो करने के लिए यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड द केस ऑफ पैराडाइम, नेचर ऑफ पैराडाइम. तो पैराडाइम इज ऑलवेज एंड ऑलवेज इट हैज प्रेजेंस ऑफ अ अप्रोच. ठीक है, it also has presence of a different methodology. If it was some other topic, third element भी हम ऐड कर सकते थे, theory. But यहाँ पर theory we are not taking into account. ठीक है, चाहे तो ले सकते हैं because it is essentially based upon the humanistic theory or humanistic concept of development. So how it has brought about from these. So what is the essentially the change in the approach with HDI? Can we say one change in the approach is related with the concept of economic development? Concept of economic development. So अगर मैं first point को लूँ, related with the change in the concept of economic development. अभी हमने पढ़ा था, did we study about that? How economic development now is seen as human development phenomena. ठीक है, so it has very clearly changed. अब मैं अगर इसको लिख रहा होता, इस पैराग्राफ में सपोज मुझे लिखना है, कोई इंटेलिजेंट बंदा अगर होगा, इफ अ इंटेलिजेंट पर्सन इज देयर, कैन आई से यहाँ पे जो हमने चीज़ें पढ़ी थी, कुड आई हैव यूज दैट? how there is change, how there is now development being perceived. Yes or no? ठीक है, I could have used those points there also. This is the thing, you are studying something for one place, but always have this open mind कि और भी जगह पर उसको यूज कर सकते हैं. एंड इफ वी डू दैट, हमें अननेसेसरी हर चीज के लिए अलग अलग, वी डोंट हैव टू स्टडी कंटेंट फॉर एवरीथिंग सेपरेटली. मेनी ऑफ द कंटेंट्स कैन बी इंटरचेंजेबली यूज्ड. दैट विल रिड्यूस अवर टास्क. सो वी हैव टू बी स्मार्ट एनफ. ठीक है, सो आई कैन टॉक अबाउट द अप्रोच. देन सेकेंड थिंग हमने बात किया था, इट हैज ब्रॉट चेंज इन methodology. Change in the methodology. And if you talk about change in methodology, tell me, before this, when we were talking about GNP, GDP, can we say the measurement which was being done of development, it is mostly related with the measurement of development or economic development? Can we say in the past period it was more of a indicator, or indicator we write it as parameter based. Parameter based development process. Yes or no? Were we taking development as single parameter, measuring development through a single parameter, and that was basically the economic growth as a parameter. ठीक है, but what has happened? Can we say with the development of HDI, now we have shifted towards a regime where we are seeing development as a multi-dimensional process which is reflected in HDI, and today we are creating a indices or index. HDI क्या है? It is an index. ठीक है, so again what is there? There is a change in methodology of how we perceive and measure economic development process. ठीक है. Similarly, if we talk about the third thing, how there is a theoretical change. Can we say before this, the theory on which the development, idea of development was based, was it conditioned by economic determinism? Yes or no? Economic needs were determining our activities. That means if it was economically profitable, I will go and destroy the forests. I will not take care, or I'll not think essentially about the impact it will create on the people, their livelihoods. ठीक है, so it was more conditioned by the idea of economic determinism. Can we say with HDI we have shifted towards the idea of humanism, humans first? If there is economic growth and it is not benefiting the human beings, it is not economic development. ठीक है, so there is the theoretical change also. और जब ये तीन चीजें, पैराडाइम की डेफिनेशन बाद में हम देखेंगे पर्सपेक्टिव्स इन ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी में, Kuhn has given the definition of paradigms. Okay, and he talks about that paradigm is essentially something, it is a phase of development in which there will be a concrete approach. To prove that approach being correct, several theoretical foundations will be created to prove that that approach, that idea, that perspective is correct. And there will be certain fixed methods, methodologies. ठीक है, so essentially what it is doing, it is bringing a paradigmatic change. तो ये तीनों चीजें हमने प्रूव करके दिखा दिया कि it has brought a kind of paradigm change. But next what I have to do, I have to also talk about the limitation, because that is the question is asking. So if we talk about the limitations, So what are the limitations of HDI? Number of limitations हैं. इसको 3 broad headings में we can keep. More we can add in that, but 3 broad headings we can keep. Within that you can further add subheadings. So when you do this methodology of headings and subheadings, then process of memorization becomes comparatively easier rather than just having, suppose मुझे 10 पॉइंट याद करने, लेकिन उस 10 पॉइंट को मैं कैटेगराइज कर लूं, then it becomes easier for us to remember. ठीक है. तो अगर मैं limitations में बात करूं तो one problem associated is with related with the methodology. ठीक है. And if we talk about methodology, tell me, can we say essentially first very important problem with HDI is that it is essentially a geometric mean of the selected parameters. Of the selected parameters. ठीक है. And if you talk about this geometric mean, अब इसमें भी अगर थोड़ा सा, if I have space, I can write little bit about how it is calculated here. So if you talk about the HDI calculation, you know it is based upon 3 parameters. One is that of income, education. Education के 2 parameters हैं. So mean year of schooling and expected years of schooling. ठीक है. And the third is the parameter of health, which is measured through life expectancy. ठीक है. So how it calculates? There are 2 steps in the calculation of HDI. ठीक है. So in step 1, index of each parameter. Each parameter is calculated. 4 parameters जो हैं, it is calculated and it would range between 0 to 1. ठीक है. How it is calculated? UNDP has designed a minimum and maximum for each of the category. ठीक है. So here is the dimension, here is the indicator, and then there is minimum and there is a maximum. So if you talk about, one is the case of health, here there is indicator is life expectancy. So minimum it should be 20 and maximum it can reach up to 85. Similarly, if you talk about, there is the criteria of education, and education में 2 होते हैं. One is the expected year of schooling and the mean year of schooling. And if you talk about minimum, here can be 0, maximum if you talk about here is 18 and here is 15. Similarly, there is the third, income or standard of living, and you know it is GNP per capita. तो ये 2000 ये PPP बेस्ड होता है. ठीक है. एंड डॉलर्स में कैलकुलेट करते हैं इसको. तो इट इज मिनिमम इज 100 एंड मैक्सिमम इज 75,000. ठीक है. So this is there. Then what, in step 1 it uses a formula to create dimension or that index. So the dimension index क्या होता है, इसका फॉर्मूला है एक्चुअल वैल्यू in that country or region minus minimum value upon maximum value minus minimum value. ठीक है. So on the basis of this, each dimension का इंडेक्स बनाया जाएगा. ठीक है. दिस एजुकेशन में क्या करते हैं, इन दोनों का जो इंडेक्स निकलेगा उसको ऐड करके उसका अर्थमेटिक मीन निकाल लेते हैं, एंड दैट अर्थमेटिक मीन विल बिकम द इंडेक्स ऑफ एजुकेशन. ठीक है. देन व्हाट हैपेंस, देन कम्स योर स्टेप 2. So in step 2, what is being done? Geometric mean of the 3-dimension index is calculated. So thus HDI would become index health into index education into index income 1/3. ठीक है. So this is how the value of HDI will be created. ठीक है. So essentially from this, can we say it is can it be very clearly seen that HDI is just calculation of an average, and if it is calculation of an average, it fails to reflect many differences which can exist in a society. ठीक है. So what happens, since it is an average, it fails to reflect many differences in the society which can exist. ठीक है. So for example, tell me, can we say that this difference can be variety of type of differences? Like for example, this difference, can it be regional? Can this difference be class based? ठीक है. Can we say that, can this difference be also gender based? ठीक है. So society is not uniform. What is the problem? Society is not uniform as is perceived by HDI. It is more diverse, and this diversity is not taken care while there is calculation of HDI. ठीक है. So methodology का एक problem है ये. Then many times what happens in this calculation of HDI, due to high score, ये second problem है, again within it is a subtopic within methodology. ठीक है. So due to high score in one or other dimension, what happens? The average score can become high. ठीक है. दो एग्जाम्पल्स ले लेते हैं. वन इज द मिडिल ईस्ट कंट्रीज, साउथ वेस्ट एशियन कंट्रीज, एंड हियर व्हाट वी फाइंड that these countries there is high, or sorry, very high income. ठीक है. So there is huge difference in their income ranking and HDI ranking. So they are very high in the income category. They are high in education. ठीक है. When it comes to health, they will range from moderate to high. These countries in the score of HDI come under the high HDI countries overall. There is inherent inequality in how education is imparted. That is not reflected. ठीक है. Same with the health. You know the status of women, for example, very low. So nothing is reflected, but they are categorized as high HDI countries. ठीक है. Take another example, some socialist countries. And one classic example is Cuba. ठीक है. So if you are talking about Cuba, in case of income, it is medium. But if you talk about in case of health and education, it is high to very high. As a result, average becomes what? It is also a high HDI country. So, although what it tries to do, it tries to find a mean of the three variables by giving equal weightage to each of them. But still in the average what will happen, it is not clearly reflected. Okay, the differences among the dimensions. So this is another problem related with HDI. Okay, so there is problem in the methodology, one problem in the methodology. Then second category, वो first category था methodology का. Second category is, it is also related with methodology, बस मैं उसको अलग कर दे रहा हूँ. It is related with the dimensions chosen. Are inadequate. So second जो क्रिटिसिज्म करना है, वो जो तीन डायमेंशंस चूज किए गए उसको क्रिटिसाइज करो. ठीक है. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, टेक द केस ऑफ हेल्थ. ठीक है. व्हाट इट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट, हेल्थ इज मेजर्ड थ्रू व्हाट? लाइफ एक्सपेक्टेंसी. Yes or no? But can I say, if suppose someone is living longer, can we say it does not mean he is also healthy? Yes or no? There is a possibility that that person essentially can be disabled, unwell, malnourished. You know, human rights says that life with dignity. Okay? So that is not reflected there. It is just talking about life expectancy. There are better measures which are there, which talk about various other aspects. Like for example, one of the better measures which is considered is IMR, which also takes into account the health, the nutritional needs, etc. of the mother as well as the child. ठीक है. Even more, like for example, other parameters like beds per patient or number of doctors per patient, that is also a better parameter which tells us about the health availability. Or in recent times, other methods have evolved, like one is daily. So what is daily? It is disability adjusted life years. It is an index which is calculated. So it is disability adjusted life years. Okay? So it tells us about not only about the longevity, it also talks about how much of the part of the life person is not able to work with freedom or with that kind of dignity because of the health issues. So it calculates all those things. So it is a much better parameter. So can we say even the health parameter which has been chosen, can it be improved? Obviously, yes, it can be improved. Similarly, when we are talking about education, can we say that the education, education criteria was changed in 2010? Okay, before it was literacy which was taken. In 2010, there was a change and the two parameters, mean year of schooling and the average years of schooling was added. Okay. But despite this, can we still say the focus in measurement of education is more on quantity rather than quality? Okay. So here the focus still remains on measurement of quantity rather than quality. So many things can be taken, like for example, students per teacher ratio can be taken. It is a very good indicator of what is the quality of education. Infrastructure in education, that is also a very good quality indicator. Okay. So there are many other parameters which are available, which are actually readily available, the data, but HDI does not take into account. Okay. Similarly, the third parameter, which is income or the living standard. So here also what it is taking, it is GNP per capita is taken as the measurement figure, but can we say again it is what? It is just an average which does not shows inequalities, and it doesn't reflect various type of needs. Like for example, if I just take an example, there is now a criteria by the name of MPI, multi-dimensional poverty index, okay, which takes into account several basic assets a person must hold to be not considered as poor. Okay. So again, here also we find that there are shortcomings. So ये हो गया हमारा सेकंड डायमेंशन जो हम कवर कर रहे थे. थर्ड डायमेंशन में can we also talk about the multi-dimensionality of development process is narrowly taken. Is narrowly taken. The focus is mainly on what? Can we say in HDI the focus is mostly quantitative? Okay. The focus is mostly on what? Can we say more on means rather than end? Okay. So it is, the focus point is more of a means rather than end. Can we bring here those, like we talked about the third phase, Amartya Sen, the capability approach? Okay, it misses out. Various other type of dimensions it misses out. Like for example, can we say even if there is economic growth, even if there is literacy is increasing or income is increasing, can there be still environmental degradation? And can it jeopardize the future of not only the present generation but also the future generation? It again fails to take into account the environmental dimension. Okay. So again, I will criticize on the basis of what? Multi-dimensionality. तो इससे हमें याद भी हो जाएगा. अब फर्स्ट क्या था, जो मेथोडोलॉजी था उस पर क्रिटिसाइज करना है. देन द थ्री पैरामीटर चोजन, they are inadequate, and third, there can be more greater multi-dimensionality which could have been introduced. and you can talk about that. Can you understand now the purpose why I essentially gave you all this? It is there. ये सारी चीजों का जो मेजरमेंट है, I have already given you, the maps are there, you can use them in this answer as well. ठीक है? So that is what essentially is HDI. जो first part लिख रहे थे उसमें if you wanted to write more things you could have written. ठीक है? Like for example, it has, if you talk about HDI, so it has brought theoretical change. Can we say with HDI one more few things has happened? Now there is comparative analysis can be done with respect to the development process. Okay, so 1-2 points there also can be added. That is basically how you will be writing the question of HDI. Moving on. So जो मैंने बातें बोली है ना उसके एग्जाम्पल्स जो मैंने कंटेंट दिया है इसमें, यू जस्ट गो होम एंड रीड दिस. ठीक है, इसमें बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल्स भी दिए हुए हैं विथ रिलेटेड विथ व्हाट वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट, ऑल्दो नॉट इन द सेम हेडिंग्स. मैंने हेडिंग्स थोड़ा चेंज कर दिया, अपने हिसाब से बना दिया. देन क्वेश्चन नंबर 6 पर आते हैं. नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज आर नीदर अ कर्स नॉर अ डेस्टिनी कमेंट. I'll give you 2 minutes. Think. Okay, so this question, if you talk about, it is about the idea which we call it as resource curse. Okay, so there is a very dominant theory in economics which talks about the resource curse idea. So what is essentially the resource curse idea? It says that even if you have presence of resources, there is greater chance that there will be exploitation and the development will not be up to the expected levels. With time, as the countries who are exporter of resources, natural resources, what will happen? The prices that they will be getting, it would decline. And essentially what will happen? They will end up getting a feeling of exploited because they are exporter of natural resources they are importer of semi-finished and finished goods. So this idea is essentially referred to as the resource curse idea. ठीक है, क्या मैं इसको, इसके दो पार्ट हैं, नो डाउट. वन इज natural resources are neither curse nor destiny. ठीक है, so can I say कि this question is quite similar to this one, question number 4? Yes or no? More or less similar है, just some examples etc. I have to change. Particularly I have to fix myself on the resource. ठीक है, availability of the resource. I can add few more things, like for example, here when I am talking about the idea of resource curse, the idea originates in the classical economics, like the ideas of Adam Smith. He also talked about the resource curse. So it is not necessary that a country, if it has resource or natural resources, it will also become developed, or an area it would become developed. Okay. So when I'm talking about resource curse, two things I have to here combine. One is if I can combine some theory and if I can combine with some example. ठीक है, और इसके लिए एक परफेक्ट थ्योरी कौन सी हो सकती है? इट इज द कोर पेरिफेरी मॉडल ऑफ फ्रीडमैन. ठीक है, दैट कैन बी अ गुड थ्योरी फॉर दिस वन. एग्जाम्पल, टेल मी, कैन वी चूज एग्जाम्पल फ्रॉम इंडिया? लाइक कैन वी take the classic case of Jharkhand? It is a very good example. Or we can take world examples. In this case, Africa is one of the best examples. Okay, I couldn't get your accent. Okay. So, the core periphery model and this one. तो कोर पेरिफेरी मॉडल क्या कहता है? इट सिंपली सेज दैट देयर विल बी अ कोर, देयर विल बी अ सेमी पेरिफेरी एंड देयर विल बी अ पेरिफेरी. In fact, there can also be a resource periphery. ठीक है, and the terms of trade are such that if you talk about core is involved in production of what? Finished goods. ठीक है, if you talk about the semi periphery, it is involved in the production of semi-finished goods. If you talk about the resource periphery, this will be essentially supplier of natural resources. ठीक है, if you talk about simply the periphery is involved in what? It is involved in the supply of human resource. ठीक है, ultimately thus what happens? They are exporting cheap and importing costly finished goods, and thus there is exploitation taking place. ठीक है, so this is basically what this is the resource curse. अब इसमें भी देखें तो it is few things are given, like for example, so dating back to Adam Smith, this is the notion that countries with abundant natural resources do not perform as well economically as those without. Far from being a blessing, minerals have an adverse impact. This is because commodity exporters face a decline over time in the relative prices of their products, and also because of the Dutch disease, whereby the resource sectors drives up the value of local currency. So if if the currency value is increasing, there will be what? Disadvantage in the export. Okay. So it hurting the competitiveness of the manufacturing exports. So one influential study was done by Jeffrey Schaas and Andrew Warner covering 97 countries between 1971 and 89. And it was found that natural resource exporters grew at appreciably lower rates than the other countries. If you talk about more recent works, there has been a recent World Bank study which has it is named as Africa's Pulse, and it has compared the growth of Africa's resource rich and non resource rich countries between 1980 and 2010. So in 1980s, both set of countries experienced a virtual stagnation in per capita gross GDP. Overall, resource-rich countries were unable to harness resource wealth in the first 2 decades. Since 2000, however, it has been different story. Higher growth in all groups is seen. With some oil-rich countries, they are in the lead. Even within the oil-rich countries, what we are finding, some are doing well than the others. For example, Equatorial Guinea experiences average annual growth rate of more than 7%. At lower end, Nigeria, Sudan, Cameroon had rates between 3 to 6%. Okay? Which clearly tells me that beside the availability of resources, there are several other factors which are also playing role in the process of development. Okay? And then I'll come to those points which we talked about. Okay, so that is this question. Moving on. Question number 7 पर आते हैं, and it is a more traditional question. Evaluate limits to growth theory in the context. Actually ये question मैंने थोड़ा सा change कर दिया था. So actually the question was, so write the new question. Discuss in brief the main theses in limits to growth and also provide a critique of the same. Discuss the main thesis in limits to growth and also provide a critique of the same. I think ये question यहाँ पे भी आया होगा. Yes, it was asked in 2018. यहाँ पे देखो. Discuss in brief the main thesis in limits to growth and also provide a critique of the same. So same question PYQ I have taken up here. Why I have taken up this question को मैंने थोड़ा change कर दिया just because I thought कि many people will be there who wouldn't have studied limits to growth properly. ठीक है? That is why I basically changed the question so that we can little bit discuss about the basics of this idea as well. So if you talk about limits to growth, you have to understand, in fact, you can also start that in the introduction itself. When we are talking about limits to growth, it is essentially a neo-Malthusian idea. Okay? So it is a neo-Malthusian idea. So you know already what is Malthus. Malthus idea was basically that the population growth is always faster than the growth of the resources, subsistence he talked about. Okay, so population is growing in geometric progression while resources are growing in arithmetic progression. So ultimately a time will come when what will happen? The growth of population will become higher. That means demand of resources will be higher. And this will lead to a crisis situation. This crisis, he called it as then there will be positive checks. Okay? Because the preventive checks will fail. They won't be able to produce such results. So Malthus' idea was very similar, basic. He simply said something like this: this is the growth of resources. While if you talk about population, population always grows exponentially. So because of this exponential growth, here there will be, Malthus calls it as positive checks. ठीक है, he has called it as the positive checks. In 1960s and later 70s, this idea of environment, protection of the environment, which we today call it as environmentalism, arose. Okay? And one of the pioneer studies, if you talk about, which has led to the birth of this idea, is the limits to growth theory. Okay? In a way, Malthus was also an environmentalist. Okay? So the same idea was revived by Meadows et al., and they provided this idea of limits to growth. So ultimately, the same phenomena will operate, and these positive checks, it talks about that there is limits to growth. There will be a crisis, and this crisis would essentially means that there will be limits to growth. ठीक है, इतनी बात समझ में आई? So that is the basic idea of limits to growth. Definitely the time was different from the Malthus. By this time already the system analysis was developed. So what they have developed, they have used this system analysis, and they have used certain variables. Okay? So if you talk about this idea is based upon certain assumptions. So they have taken, the model is based upon 6 major assumptions. What are these? ये PPT में upload करवा दूंगा. ठीक है? What are these assumptions? A finite stock of exploitable non-renewable resources. That means he considers, or this model considers, non-renewable resources to be what? Finite. Number 1. Finite amount of land that can be used to grow food. That means there is finite amount of arable land. ठीक है? Can we say, बाद में देखेंगे इसका criticism. Do we find that China is violating this assumption at a very large scale in Xinjiang? Same thing is being today done by Saudi Arabia. ठीक है? You might be aware that last year Saudi Arabia produced its own wheat. ठीक है? At very large scale. And because of which they did not need to import so much of wheat. Then third, finite capacity of the environment to absorb pollutants. Fourth, finite yield of food that can be obtained from each unit of land. Exponential growth of population, pollution and industrial outputs as long as resource supplies and interactions with variables in the system permits. So they will grow exponentially. Population will grow exponentially, pollution will also grow exponentially, and industrial output will also grow exponentially. And the sixth, forms of technological changes. It takes into account the technological change which is inbuilt. So it is not as pessimist as Malthus, although it is also pessimist with respect to technology. So based on these assumptions, they have created certain models. 7 runs they talk about. what will be the scenario. Okay, and they have taken which variables? They have taken resources, which is essentially non-renewable resources. They have taken food per capita. They have taken population as one of the variable, pollution and industrial output per capita. So 5 variables they have taken in the system. Okay, so in system analysis they have used. So first run is what they have called it as the standard. So this standard run, if you talk about, it is essentially based upon what? It is based upon the past historical experience of the previous decades. So it is based upon the fact that if the resource base remains same as it was in the past decades and the rate of consumption also remains same, what will be essentially the scenario? Okay, so they predict that ultimately, because there is resource availability, there will be rise in food per capita, there will be rise in industrial output per capita, and thus there will be also rise in population. ठीक है, so population बढ़ेगा, ये सारी चीजें बढ़ती रहेंगी. Ultimately there will be also ये pollution है, this is population. Ultimately there will be some pollution also, but here can you see limits to growth is being brought? Primary reason for bringing this limits to growth is what? Decline in resource availability. Remember, it was inbuilt in the assumption that till the resources will permit, growth will occur. If the resource scarcity is faced, the growth will essentially stop. So there is limits to growth because of the lack of availability of resources. Then last point mein assumption mein there are some technological changes are inbuilt. So now they assume that the resource levels have doubled. Okay. Now because the resource levels have doubled, what will happen? The industrial output per capita will keep on growing. The food per capita, if you talk about, it will also keep on growing, and as a result the population will keep on also growing. In fact, as a result of which, can you see, there will be a very strong exponential growth of pollution. So in this run, in this second scenario, runs here scenarios, predictions of future. So in this second scenario, limits to growth is brought about by 2 factors. One, can you see again there is resource decline, and the second factor is very high pollution levels, which will create health emergency. Okay, so that is the case. Third mein, there is the resources have, the level of resources has further increased because of the development of technology. New reserves are being found, etc., and resource is not a problem. But can you see what happens with industrial output per capita बढ़ रहा है, population बढ़ रहा है, food per capita बढ़ रहा है? What happens with pollution? There is exponential again growth in pollution. ठीक है? So the same problem, now the pollution in itself is sufficient enough to bring limits to growth. ठीक है? Similarly, if you talk about now, there is a more technological inbuilt situation which is created where technology is developed to control pollution. Okay. Ultimately, what happens? You can see there is growth taking place, all the parameters are increasing. Problem becomes this. Because what was the issue? Was there presence of finite land? There is finite arable land. So again, it won't be able to support all of the population. As a result, what will happen? There will be again limits to growth applied. Okay. So it goes on and it talks about these several runs. So again, in the other case, there is technology takes care of productivity. Productivity increases. So the food per capita increases. But again, the other parameters become worse, as a result of which what will happen? There will be limits to growth. So it goes on. So it talks about 7 scenarios, and in each of these scenarios, essentially what happens? There is limits to growth. Okay. I hope it is clear what is essentially limits to growth. So this was the basic idea of the limits to growth. That is why we said limits to growth theory or the model is essentially neo-Malthusian in nature. Malthus ने क्या लिखा है अपनी theory में? Malthus has written that although there will be application of preventive checks, but they will never become sufficient so that the positive checks will not apply in more or less regular fashion. This means preventive checks will be inefficient and ultimately there will be application of the positive checks. So this idea also talks about the same thing. ठीक है, I hope it clear हो गया. So this is the background. That means if I am writing about the first part of this question, which is saying main theses of limits to growth. ठीक है. So when we'll talk about this main thesis of limits to growth, intro, and here we'll talk about the period of early 70s when there was rise of a neo-Malthusian concept in the form of limits to growth by Meadows et al. ठीक है. What they did, they used systems model. So from here you can start your main body and write general things. They have used systems model, choosing 5 parameters to do what? To predict future growth scenario. To predict future growth scenario. ठीक है. Then this model is based upon several assumptions. They are very important, should be written. ठीक है. So if they are based upon assumptions, tell me, can we say it is a deterministic model? ठीक है. Anything which is based upon assumption, it is deterministic, it is deductive as well. So it is which type of model? It is a deductive model. It deduces. बाद में देखेंगे deduction and induction. ठीक है. Deductive is basically what? When I am making a new law on the basis of a previously existing bigger law. This is basically what? It is deduction. ठीक है. Like for example, plate tectonics पढ़ा है. Plate tectonics क्या कहता है? One of the primary force which is responsible for the movement of plates is slab pull. ठीक है. So बड़ा theory क्या है? Gravity. Gravity is a universal force which is present on the surface of the earth. ठीक है. So gravity is doing what? It is pulling the heavy ocean crust which has become older and colder enough and whose density has become higher. ठीक है. So that is basically what? This is deduction. Induction, मैं बहुत सारे छोटी छोटी चीजों को पढ़ूं और उसमें से कॉमन पैटर्न्स को निकालूं एंड देन आई मेक अ यूनिवर्सल लॉ, दैट इज इंडक्शन. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल मैंने सेंसस कंडक्ट किया और सेंसस कंडक्ट करने के बाद मैंने एक जनरल कंक्लूजन निकालता हूं. इफ आई टेक आउट अ जनरल कंक्लूजन, एज वन मूव्स टुवर्ड्स साउथ, literacy levels increase. Can we say it is a kind of law in India? ठीक है. So again, but this was based upon what? I did a survey. ठीक है. Studied individual phenomena, found common patterns and then made a law. So that is basically what? That is induction. That is inductive. Here it is the deductive model. All the models and theories that you will be studying which are based upon assumptions, they are basically what? They are deductive. Because if the assumptions fail, the models will also fail. ठीक है. So it is also what? It is a deductive model. So I'll talk about the assumption and ultimately I will talk about the scenarios, or it calls about the runs predicted. इसमें what I will do, I will write in elaboration, डिटेल में लिखूंगा कौन सा रन, स्टैंडर्ड रन, ठीक है. So this should be written in more detail and with diagram. एक डायग्राम जरूर बनाना है of the standard, but others I will write a kind of summary because सातों लिखना मुश्किल भी होगा. We don't also have the space. So what is the, I will here write the crux of other scenarios. ठीक है. So what is the crux of other scenarios? Can we say no matter what steps are taken, ultimately one or the other factor brings limits to growth. ठीक है. And out of the other 6, I will take 1-2 examples and write about them. ठीक है. So that is the basic idea of the theory of limits to growth. तो ये फर्स्ट पार्ट हो गया हमारा मेन थीसिस. दिस इज द मेन थीसिस ऑफ लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ एंड ऑल्सो प्रोवाइड द क्रिटिक ऑफ द सेम. अब क्रिटिक पे आते हैं. सो इफ यू टॉक अबाउट द क्रिटिक ऑफ द लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ आइडिया, हमेशा याद रखना कि जो भी हमने बात किया था, I इज इक्वल टू PAT. So I is basically what? Environmental impact. It is tied to population size. It is related to affluence levels. It is related with technology. ठीक है. पॉपुलेशन साइज किसका आइडिया है? एफ्लुएंस, मार्क्स, टेक्नोलॉजी. इट इज टेक्नोसेंट्रिक व्यू पॉइंट. इट इज ऑल्सो रेफर टू एज द कॉर्नोकोपियंस. ठीक है. So limits to growth is essentially what? Can we say it is neo-Malthusian idea? Does it means that there will be two basic category of criticism? Yes or no? दो बेसिक तरह के क्रिटिसिज्म होंगे, उसके सब टाइप्स हो सकते हैं, but there will be two basic categories of criticism. So one criticism will be, can I say technocentric criticism? And other, if you talk about, will be the political economic criticism, the Marxist criticism or the radical criticism. तो अगर मैं सबसे पहले अपने आप को याद रखने के लिए, if I just talk about first the technocentric criticism. So technocentric क्या बोलते हैं? Technocentric say that essentially if you talk about, there will be no such crisis, because what will happen? Any scarcity will essentially inform the innovators. ठीक है. So what is the basic technocentric idea? It is simply that if there is scarcity of any resource, and if in that area there is market based mechanism which is based upon demand and supply of commodities, so that will be, because of that mismatch between demand and supply, it will be reflected in the price of that particular commodity. So if the price becomes high, it will automatically inform the people who are innovators, and they will either innovate in the same resource or develop alternatives for that. So there will be no such resource scarcity which will be present. In fact, they believe that necessity is mother of all inventions. So if there is increase in the population size, it means what? It means that there will be inventions to cater to the needs of the people. So there will be no such crisis. And they say, if it was so, then why the predictions have not come true? Why the various predictions which were made by limits to growth, they have not materialized? Okay, like for example, so number of criticisms were there, like take this. This is also technocentric criticism, static reserve index. Model has been criticized for assuming that the non-renewable resources are scarce and are likely to be exhausted by the year 21st century. This perspective is based on the use of static reserve index, which is the ratio of the current reserves to the current use or consumption. The current reserves represent known resources that are economically extractable. ठीक है, अब इसको मैं अगर डायग्राम में एक दिखाऊं तो कैन यू सी दिस? This is essentially your resource base. Out of that, there is identified resources and there are undiscovered resources. Out of that, there are measured resources, indicated resources and inferred resources. So, measured and indicated is what we take as reserves. Does it mean that in future, if the technology increases, changes, can we say that this reserves can increase? Okay. In fact, it is very important that if we talk about here, this idea of limits to growth takes a narrow view of resources. There are two perspectives on resources. One is the Malthusian perspective, which considers resources to be finite. Okay? Resources to be given. But today's idea of resources, what it says, that resources are not given. Resources are created by humans. Okay? A very famous scientist or economist, Zimmerman, lots of work on resources he has done. Zimmerman says that resources are essentially created by the human beings. That means we develop technology to use nature as resource. Coal was even before, but it was not used as resource. Only when we were able to develop technology, it became a resource. Same in recent times, talk about the shale gas revolution. We knew that there was shale gas and oil, but we couldn't extract it. Now we have developed the method, so it has become what? It has become a resource for the humanity. You know, entire US oil and gas industry, so much it is based upon the shale gas. So again, it was related with what? Development of the technology. So if you can develop technology, this limitation, the static reserve view which is being taken by the limits to growth, it wouldn't hold true. ठीक है? Similarly, जो अभी हमने बात किया technological development, so it does not takes into account, it takes a very narrow view of technological development. ठीक है? Like for example, think, it talks about finite arable land. Can we say today we are in the era of vertical farming? We have developed hydroponics, aeroponics, where we don't even need land. Okay? The only thing is we have to reduce the cost of these technologies. And in future, maybe the cost will reduce. We have done so in, for example, solar. Okay? So again, it has taken a very narrow view of technological, very restrictive view of what technological development can do. So that is also a very important issue. Then, for example, food production वाली बात ही जो अभी बात कर रहे थे. The model assumes availability of limited land and consequent decline in food production. According to A. Khan, whenever certain limits are reached, new technologies are introduced with the passage of time. these technologies effectively either remove the limit, or as time passes subsequently technology can remove the limit. Alternatives can also be developed. Okay? So for example, in developing countries, was there development of green revolution, which was able to solve the food crisis which they were facing? Today we are talking about the biotechnology revolution, this green revolution 2 we are talking about. ठीक है? So what this view says, इसका view ये है कि rather than this kind of scenario, this is the scenario which is predicted by Malthus and Neo-Malthus. So this view says that it is not so, it is something like this. If population suppose is growing in this manner, exponential growth is taking place, the resource growth will be bit sudden increase. So these are what? These are technological revolutions which take place. Like there was agricultural revolution, green revolution. Okay? So these technological revolutions essentially take care of the availability of resources. So we don't need to worry about that. Similarly, other things, even if you take like the predictions which were made by population growth predictions. So it calculated that by it would reach 7 billion in 2000, the population of the world. And if mortality rate continues, it would reach 14.4 billion in 2030. What is the reality? The reality is it was only 6 billion in 2000 and 7 billion. It was ultimately, if you talk about, it was reaching somewhere in 2011-12 में जाकर के. ठीक है? And if we look into the current fertility scenarios, can we say that even in the developing countries, fertility decline has started? Yes or no? In majority of developing countries, the large developing countries particularly, the fertility decline has essentially started. And historically speaking, if we look into history of the world, history of humanity, it is very clear that once fertility begins to decline, it is an irreversible process. So many countries have tried so many steps. They have developed pro-natal policies, but none of them have worked. They continue. The fertility continues to decline. Recent example is China. If you look into China, China relaxed its one-child policy. Okay, started to take several steps, welfare steps, to make sure that the fertility again rises. But right now in China, the fertility has declined to 1.6, to the levels of Europe. Okay, so very big problem they are facing. So under such scenario, you cannot think that the population predictions which had been done by limits to growth will ever become true. Okay? Pollution, no doubt, is a concern. Today we are talking about this, like the problem of climate change, global warming. Okay? But still, can we say countries are trying to take steps? A very good example, if you talk about, is the ozone hole. Did it show, if you talk about the commitments which were essentially done by the countries, has it led to healing of the ozone hole? Yes or no? There has been healing. It is not complete, but it has become thicker. So it is very clear indication that countries are trying, and there is potential that if we try together, even we'll be able to take care of the problem of global warming. Okay? So this is all, this is basically what, this will come under the head of technocentric criticism. ये सारे criticism technocentric criticism. ठीक है? दूसरा, the second category of criticism, it is political economy criticism. सो पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमिक क्रिटिसिज्म में एक क्रिटिसिज्म तो सीधा सीधा मार्क्स का क्रिटिसिज्म है, एंड व्हाट मार्क्स और मार्क्सिस्ट, in fact what Marxists are of the view that the limits to growth, if you talk about limits to growth, talks about population size as the problem. But can we say it is alone not the problem? Is it also the spread of consumerist culture which has become a problem, the use and throw culture? Yes or no? We are unmindfully using the resources because the spread of the consumerist culture. Consumerist culture mein what happens? These things, many of these things will come in perspectives in detail more and in environment geography. Okay? In consumerist culture, what happens? The society is created in such a manner that more consumption you do, greater will be your respect in the society, status in the society. Okay? Whether that consumption has utility or not, it doesn't matter. Okay? The greater the consumption, greater will be your status in the society. So today what we are doing, majority of the places on earth today we are indulging in this consumerist cultures. So limits to growth remains silent on the consumption, the affluence levels. So what it says that limits to growth is essentially a propaganda of capitalist. It is essentially a capitalist propaganda. What it believes that there is enough resources. There are enough resources in the world. In fact, you might be aware, Marx had a view on technology. He believed that technology would take care of resource growth. The only problem was the system. So capitalists were using technology for exploitation of the poor. This was the problem. Technology in itself was not the problem. Okay? So there are enough resources. The problem is what? The politico-economic system. So if we can remove this politico-economic system, then the problem will be solved. We have to replace it with a communist system. That is the Marxist idea and criticism. Then this political economy view, Marxist view, in fact, further talks about this propaganda. So according to them, what is essentially the problem related or limits to growth? So अगर थोड़ा सा हम हिस्ट्री में जाएं लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ की, तो यू माइट बी नोइंग दैट लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ, दिस डिस्कशन स्टार्टेड इन वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज. What was the trigger point? The trigger point was the developing countries. After Second World War, developing countries became independent and they started their own journey of development. Okay? So as they started their own journey of development, can I say there will be also demographic transition? So with demographic transition, there will be that population boom phase, the second stage of demographic transition when population is growing at a very fast rate. Okay? So there was a fear, there was a concern which came that if there is so much of the resources which will be utilized by these countries by themselves for their own purpose, then what will happen? Historically, they had enjoyed through colonization the resources of other countries, and that was the reason why they were able to achieve such high standards of living. Can we say ultimately thus what will happen? They will have to compromise on some various standards of living. And can you see that it is already taking place? In the developed world, they are already talking about several austerity measures. They are already talking about cutting down of the emissions. Okay? Why? Because now India and China, they are growing at fast pace. Their emissions are high. So even if they cut their emissions and India and China don't cut, there will be again global warming taking place. Okay? So what is happening? The share which they enjoyed, the lion's share, now they will have to share with the developing countries also, because their population will be increasing. Okay? So because of this fear also propelled the studies of limits to growth. So this is basically what, this is the political economic criticism of limits to growth. So that is the answer. लास्ट में हम लिख सकते हैं अभी का जो कुछ कुछ सिनेरियोस चल रहे, like for example, can we say there is no doubt that global warming is a very clear indication that there should be what, there should be balance. Otherwise the Malthusian fears, when they can become reality, will not even get a hint. Already so many patterns are changing. ठीक है, so that will be essentially the conclusion of this answer. बाकी इसमें और भी बहुत सारे पॉइंट्स लिखे हुए हैं. जस्ट यू हैव टू ऑर्गेनाइज अंडर हेड्स. जो मैंने हेड्स बताए उसमें ऑर्गेनाइज कर लोगे तो याद भी रहेगा. ठीक है. क्वेश्चन नंबर 8, द नेक्स्ट ग्लोबल रिसोर्स क्राइसिस विल बी ओवर minerals. Comment. So you know very well that ultimately there was this thing in news, particularly it was in news related to strategic minerals. ठीक है. तो इसमें अब यहां पर देखो क्या है, there is a keyword comment. ठीक है. When there is comment as a keyword, it is very clear that what I have to do, I have to take a more balanced view. कमेंट का मतलब है मुझे थोड़ी आजादी मिल रही है. ठीक है, कि वेदर आई कैन टेक अ मोर अगेंस्ट व्यू और फॉर व्यू, बट आई हैव टू शो माई बैलेंस पर्सनालिटी, सो आई विल टेक अ मोर बैलेंस व्यू इन कमेंट. दैट मीन्स आई विल एग्री एज वेल एज डिसएग्री with this idea that the next resource crisis will be over minerals. तो सबसे पहले मैं क्या करूंगा, डिसएग्री कर लेता हूं. ठीक है. एंड डिसएग्रीमेंट में व्हाट थिंग्स आई विल डू, आई विल टॉक अबाउट फ्यू थिंग्स लाइक द हियर आई हैव गिवन सम, ये बाद में भी हम यूज करेंगे, लाइक हाउ द आयरन ओर प्रोडक्शन हैज ग्रोन. इफ यू टॉक अबाउट कॉपर एंड जिंक प्रोडक्शन हैज कंटिन्यू टू ग्रो. ठीक है. And if you talk about others, these are the second category, strategic minerals का मैंने दे रखा है. ठीक है. So again, using this as the framework, I will try to disagree, because ultimately it is based upon what, technology. So resource base, एक example लेते हैं. Today one of the scarce mineral resource that we find on the surface of the earth, this is essentially what it is, copper. ठीक है. The ore which is present on the land, in that there is only 1% metal content, most of the ores which are left on land. So copper is something which has become a scarce commodity today. But can we say what we have done to overcome this crisis? We have started to develop the deep sea mineral resources, polymetallic nodules. Polymetallic nodules contain 8% by weight copper. ठीक है. So the present deep sea mining which is being done, it is primarily for what? It is primarily for copper and such resources, because we have enough iron ore and manganese on land. That is not a problem. ठीक है. So that is a very good example of how ultimately present reserves which we are talking about, it is based upon the present technology that we have. If we increase the technology, what can happen? There can be more resources. जो अभी हम लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ का फंडा यूज कर रहे थे, दिस इज रेफर्ड टू एज द हुबर्ट्स कर्व. ठीक है. दिस इज हुबर्ट्स कर्व. So this is here time and this is essentially production. ठीक है. So a non-renewable resource, this is referred to as the Hubert's curve. So production of a non-renewable resource, it takes this form. And Hubert was very correct in predicting that after 1990s, the production of oil in US will decline. Even the numbers smashed. ठीक है. So this is the non-renewable resources trend of production. But can we say this is again based upon a presumed technological level? If suppose the reserves increase, can we say this peak can be later? Yes or no? If we add there the factor of recycling, this peak can become even bigger and later. ठीक है. Similarly, if I add others like development of alternatives, ठीक है. So again, when we are talking about the resource crisis or the mineral resource crisis, you have to understand that resources are man-made. They depend upon what? Technology. ठीक है. तो ये फर्स्ट पार्ट हो गया, how I'll be writing it. Then the second part where I will little bit agree. And the problem actually is what? This idea is there. It is a more Western intellectual concept which has come in recent times. So basically what is there? The Western countries are afraid that certain strategic mineral resources, today their production is dominated by certain countries which are enemy countries. And clearly you can understand it is China. And they have ultimately realized in the Ukraine-Russia war. Much of the, if you talk about gas supplies of Europe, they were coming from where? Russia. And there has been disruption because of the monopolization in that area Russia has. So this has created a geopolitical problem for them. Even if the European countries want to support Ukraine, they cannot fully support. Okay? They don't want this scenario to be repeated in case of the mineral resource, particularly strategic minerals. Okay? So this crisis that we are today talking about, it is basically what? It is more of a geopolitical crisis rather than the crisis of availability of resources. Okay? I hope it is clear. Okay? So that is the perspective you take and you write. There is enough content which I have given in the material. It is basically that article which was talking about this idea that the next crisis will be over minerals. Okay? So today we targeted 8 questions we have completed. Average हमारा target होगा कि we will complete 10 to 12 questions per session. So by this we will be able to do around 350 questions in the sessions. Okay? 150 questions will be covered through the tests. And that will make it 500 plus questions, which will be more than enough to cater to the needs of your examination. ठीक है. इस क्लास में तुम लोगों को एक चीज और समझ में आ गया होगा, which I told you earlier, that here we will be doing more than you did in your foundation in terms of content also. ठीक है. And many basics also will take care. You just have to remember it, you just have to revise it. It will be more than enough. Remember, wherever you feel shortage of content, you see, ये टॉपिक का लिंकेज अभी हमें एग्रीकल्चर में मिलेगा, रिसोर्स में मिलेगा, विल बी फाइंडिंग इन इंडस्ट्री, विल बी फाइंडिंग इन ट्रांसपोर्ट ट्रेड, विल बी फाइंडिंग इन रीजनल प्लानिंग. So several places we will be finding that there will be linkage of this topic. So their content will not be a problem. Problem will emerge only if you are unable to memorize and recall. ठीक है? Okay, goodbye, take care. We'll meet in the next class.